leave now if you don't want to be recorded. Okay. Hey, everyone. Today is Tuesday, July 2nd. Wow, it's July. That came quick. It is 2024. This is a meeting of the SIG Network Policy API subgroup to SIG Network. This is a CNCF sponsored meeting, so please be nice to each other. And yeah, let's have a good day today. As I was just mentioning, not much on the agenda. Not much to talk about today other than what Shane and Mike have on the agenda about a possible collaboration point with Gateway API. So what is this GEP that you linked here, Shane? I'll
Yep,
share
one
the
sec.
GEP with
Let
everyone.
me let me just I don't have the docs open right away. I forgot. So just one sec.
You're good. I just put that GEP in the chat message too.
Oh, yeah. So let me just do a quick review here and then I'll so basically we tried to do, and I was kind of the shepherd, like the person trying to help a group that is largely telcos, to do egress through Gateway API. Now they are, in fact, doing egress through Gateway API today with their own custom solution. They were hoping to standardize something so that they don't have to in the future readjust from some new standard that comes in, etc. The short version is they want to be able to use a gateway in kind of like the classic sense of a gateway, like the classic networking sense, like as a router. So for ingress and egress, and be able to say, like in a pod, the default route for traffic out of the pod in the in that namespace will be to the gateway, and all traffic go through it. So telco use cases really need to have that kind of fine-tuned control about where everything's going.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, so that's the TLDR. One of the things that we were talking about was talking, just I guess just putting it more or less, just putting it on your, is Morris here? He is.
Yeah, Mike just
Just
got
it's
here.
more or less just kind of putting it on your radar a bit. But there would seem to be some potential for opportunities for a network policy to be involved in egress. So we don't have a proposal. We just wanted to let you know that this was something that's gone on, and it's been really hard to push forward in Gateway API. And one of the reasons for that is that Gateway API has, despite our intentions, really just become very focused on L7. Um,
Yeah.
and so TCP route and UDP route have never really taken off. We never really got into like the L3 space with like an L3 kind of routing mechanism. That never really happened. Everything's L7. So we just never got into a position where we were ready to support this kind of use case well. So we're looking at other areas, other groups. Multi-network has had some communication with Philip Klatt and the team about, like, how KNI was actually kind of poised to be potentially helping
Right.
with egress use cases. I see Surya's hand is up. Go ahead, Surya.
No, I think you answered a lot of my questions because there was like, wait a second, don't we do L7 stuff? So where is this kind of gateway coming from was the first question I had. But just take a step back. I probably should read that GEP, but it surprised me a bit when you said the pod's default route would point to this gateway. So all pods in my cluster, when they need to talk to something outside the cluster, are going to go through this one single gateway or multiple
That's
gateways. Is that?
that's how their custom solution works today. Yeah.
And you will do the SNAT on the gateway when you
Yeah.
go out, and that would
Yep.
be
I mean, I don't know
SNAT
all
to
the
what?
details of exactly what they do. They shared this with us. Also, I should probably point out they started sharing with this with us like a couple of years ago and have not been able to get traction. So my memory of everything isn't great. And what you're reading here is actually us finally closing this because we realized it wasn't going to move forward. So we're not necessarily asking network policy to take anything on. Just suffice to say, it's good to have cross awareness with these kinds of things. When you have an entity out there that's, in the case of telcos, multiple telcos, fairly big entity that's doing something interesting in the networking space that might be worth standardizing, it's good for the entire SIG to kind of at least be sort of aware of it. So it's not an ask like we need you guys to dig into this. However, if you have similar use cases, then it might be a situation where it's like, oh, this actually aligns with something that I'm doing. Maybe I'll go talk to Quang and Philip, and we can help facilitate that conversation and be a part of it in the Gateway API group as well. Well,
I think
hopefully
there's
that makes
several-
sense.
Sorry, I'm just
Yeah.
reading through. Sorry, go ahead, Sean. Sorry.
I think there are several CNIs that have some kind of egress gateway mechanism of some sort that they're all called roughly egress gateway, but as I understand it, they all work in vastly different ways or have a different model. So yeah, might be a herding cat situation, trying to get them all onto the same page.
Yep, absolutely. So again, not asking for anybody to go do
Yeah,
anything.
just
Put it on
saying
your radar. You're aware of it, and if you find, oh, I actually do have something that plays with this, now you know it's there. It's something somebody wants to do.
I mean, if there's use cases here that pertain directly to like being able, I mean, I don't think we're ever going to be in the mode of like shaping traffic on egress, but like if there's, you know, policy that can be applied or certain policy we're missing on egress today, that would be cool additional use cases. But yeah, I don't think we're ever going to be like, oh, network policy is going to regiment that traffic is SNATed before leaving the cluster, right? Like that's sort of traffic shaping, in my opinion, rather than just standard enforcement. So, but I'm reading. I just posted. There was a doc in that GEP that
entirely for
goes
your entirely for your considerations. No proposal.
Yeah, it looks interesting, and I mean, we're pretty. They mention it in this doc too. Like, Oven Kubernetes worked a lot with F5 on this use case.
Oh,
before,
that's
and
them.
like we have a
That's
couple.
This.
Yeah, we have a couple.
That is them. Yeah.
We have a couple kind of solutions to facilitate such use cases, right, Surya? Like, I mean, we have an egress router. I don't know if it's actually used in the telco use case today, but
no, we have something called an external gateway, right? Like we use it with F5. So that's what's piqued my interest in this whole thing. And I see that the Google Doc mentions Oven Kubernetes and shows the F5 docs, right? Like so.
Yeah. So
yeah,
it's F5
it's very
and
interesting
Verizon,
even
I think,
considering.
are interested.
Yeah, it's actually pretty interesting to considering doing this in Kubernetes. It's high time we do something like this in a more API fashion.
Roger that.
But coming back to policies, I think it's something definitely to keep in mind also. Like as far as we're concerned today, our the position where we apply the policy even if we don't have a good definition of that, always is very close to the pod, right? Like as soon as it comes out, the point where it's egressing from the pod is when we apply it. So any egress outside the cluster without the gateway would behave same. But ingress is, I guess, more interesting maybe.
yeah, ingress could be
it's
interesting.
interesting and kind of unique. I know that there's been a couple of entities that have been interested in something like this. The reason it hasn't taken off is because there's not been like full force, a bunch of people interested, but bigger groups are interested in it. So it's yeah. And KNI, for the record, is spinning down. That would have been an area where we could have potentially started approaching this kind of thing. So that's probably not going to work out in the shorter term. So just things to think about.
Today I learned KNI is spinning down. That's good to know.
Yeah, I guess I shouldn't have like announced it here like that, but Mike already like deleted everything, like started closing. I thought, you know, if you watch the KEP, he closed the KEP and stuff. So I guess that's spinning down for the moment. Doesn't mean it can never come back, but at least for the moment, it's spun down. So sorry to announce it this way. I guess I thought everybody might have probably noticed by now, but
no,
it's my faux pas.
SIG network
And
is
the
just so
solution-
big. It's a struggle to keep track of
is.
everything that touches it.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
it's like 5 SIGs in one. I mean, we're part of that, right? Like we're a sub SIG to the SIG that is handling a lot of the complexity for policies. So
another reason why these kinds
this
of
is good.
cross communication things should probably happen more often.
Yeah,
stuff we can do.
Yeah, I mean that's like, again, you know, we still live a little bit in silos. We've had a bunch of good talks about integrating like the work we do here with Gateway API at some point, at some level, right? Because the ingress story is still like, we've yet to define it, right? Completely yet to define it, because our answer is, you know, administrators explicitly make and provide ingresses to clusters. So like, why do you need a policy on top of that if, you know, stuff isn't exposed to everything by default, which is usually the case, right? So that's kind of our answer now, but I don't think it's the best answer forever, right? With Gateway API, you have the ability to make ingresses a lot better. And I'm sure there's places where policy could help a lot, right? But it's a matter of bandwidth, unfortunately. Like, I'd love to pick that up. Don't have time. I'm sure others would too. Don't have time. So welcome to the upstream. Anyway, off my high horse. Thanks for bringing this up. I want to
Yeah,
give
no
it a
worries.
read. I think it's kind of interesting.
Thanks for the considerations. I appreciate your time.
Cool beans. Okay, so nothing else on the agenda for today. So we can have a short meeting if others don't have anything else to talk about. A quick update on my end. I am primed to cut the 0.20 release. I really am just waiting on Rahul's PR, which needs an update. And I know he's not here, but if he watches the meeting, he can see that that's what I'm looking for. Sorry, did you just raise your hand?
Yeah, I thought we wanted to do one release without FQDN and then one release with FQDN.
Okay, we can do that. Did we want the release without to be 0.20 and the release with to be 0.21?
So right now we are at 0.11, right? And our tags
Right.
latest is 0.15.
Yeah,
I'm okay with doing the release as 0.16 without FQDN, then
okay.
0.20 with FQDN.
Okay, but last week Yang had said, didn't Yang kind of say that we have breaking changes so that we shouldn't just do a patch release? Like with what we have between 0.11 and now, there are some breaking changes internal to like the Go types that we've used. So
yeah, but that's totally okay because the entire API is alpha. Everybody should be expecting breaking releases till we go to beta.
Fair enough.
Like even client-side breaking changes and server-side breaking changes. Like I would stop doing breaking changes maybe when we go beta, and that is whatever the equivalent, if in your mind the series is 0.2 or 0.3, right? Like whatever that would be. But in 0.1, I expect us to break everything actually. So
okay, so I'm gonna update my API review PR. I'm gonna change it back to 0.16. I'm gonna say note this does not include FQDN support. Okay, and then I'm gonna mark it as ready for review. Does not include FQDN support from. And this brings up a good point. Hunter, we have you on the call. Like today, we aren't packaging the network policy assistant in any way during our releases. And I don't think we need to necessarily follow kind of the release cadence we do for the API itself. But I'd like to get your wheels turning on like when you think we'd be ready to cut an official release of that and how we want to package and release it, right? Like, do we want to release it in an official container image? Do we want to just release official binaries built for different architectures? Like, I just want to get your wheels spinning on that so that people can easily consume it.
Okay,
I
yeah.
think
I would just initially think that we could do like a sub release in the repo or something like that.
Yeah, that's totally fine. I mean, the main thing is today, like when I cut 0.16, there'll be a tag of 0.16 and that'll have obviously all the network policy assistant code in it. I think it would just be cool to have also a built binary in the release payload of that assistant so that folks can use it from a release payload. But I'm fine with having sub releases. Like we can have a v0.16, and then we could have a, v0.01 dash and NPA or something, network policy assistant, right? So I think
Okay,
that'd be
yeah,
cool
we could do it
soon.
anyway, actually. But I hear what you're saying. I think we still have a bit of work to do.
Okay. That's
So I'll
fine.
keep you posted. Yeah.
Yeah, when you get to like a point where you think you're ready for a usable pre-release even, just let me know and we can work through like how we want to bundle it and release it. I just want to make sure it's easy for people to digest rather than them having to like build from source.
Yeah, definitely. Okay.
Cool. Okay, so I'm going to mark it as right. So Surya, just so, and everyone else, just so you're clear, I have this API review PR up. It's as draft right now. I'm marking it as ready to review. The goal of that is to get approval from the SIG network approvers. So that's like Tim and Antonio, etc. Once they approve that, that PR number is going to be the API approved annotation on our CRD. So the moment that gets approved and okayed by Tim and others, I'll be able to cut the release.
Yep, that sounds good.
Amazing. Okay, I just marked it as ready for review. Awesome. Okay, I'm just looking back at our last week's agenda to make sure I didn't miss anything else.
What about our plan for beta? So once we get FQDN in and we give it some soak time for
Mhm.
getting some feedback, is there any other things on your mind that you would think we need to do? Or anybody else here
I
on the
think,
call thinks we should?
I think our core set of features has been soaking for a good bit. We have a couple implementations now. We're in the process of getting more. The only thing that we had slated for beta that we have not been able to push over the finish line is tenancy. But again, like if we don't, us here don't have users screaming for it, I don't think it's something we need to have to go to beta. Like I think we can bring tenancy in as an alpha feature, right? So, or as an experimental feature in the beta API. Sorry.
Yeah, we could do the experimental in beta, I guess.
Because like Shane, you all are GA. When you implement new features in Gateway API today, they are automatically GA, right? But they're experimental.
No, they're not GA. So they go through the experimental channel first, and there's a process for getting it to GA to standard.
Okay.
And that's
Yeah,
the
but
release
still,
channel experimental. It's all in the GEP overview or something. It'll kind of walk through how we do it. But we do a 6-month soak.
We had to create a
Right,
new
but
process because the existing
We had to create a new old
alpha beta
process.
versing scheme is insufficient for introducing new things like
new things later on. Yeah.
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 Yeah, so I think we do something similar. The 6-month soak time, minimum 2 implementations, a little bit of scale benchmark, all that are the requirements for something to graduate from experimental to standard. But our question's more around how does the experimental and standard tie with alpha, beta, V1? And so let's say we've already made
Oh.
the API V1, which I think Gateway API had with 1.0.0, right?
Yeah.
It's a
We'll
stable API.
Yeah.
So then when you have new features there, you don't go through the alpha beta thing, right? Like in, it's just
No.
experimental with graduation straight to V1 type API.
It kind of depends, but but no. If it's like HTTP route experimental features, then it'll go into the experimental channel, but it'll still be under V1 API. So, but if it's like TCP route or TLS route, we've never graduated those beyond V1 alpha 1. So it would go there. It's not great. But yeah, that's how
That's
it's done.
tricky. Because
It's a
now,
little
so
tricky.
right now, are there implementations out there? So you're not like deprecating V1 alpha 1 even necessarily because you
No.
have some implementations still on them.
Yes. So right now,
Uh.
when we talk V1 Alpha 1, we're really mostly just talking about like TLS route, which is going to get a boost probably before Salt Lake. It'll end up either being or being close to finally being standard in V1, because we have the conformance tests and stuff for it now. And that's kind of what drags them forward into V1 is conformance tests. But really, we're just talking about TCP and UDP route. So for the most part, you're talking about a V1 version of the API right now, if it's like an experimental gateway or experimental route feature.
And the distinction with our like experimental standard things, we basically have two sets of CRDs. You can install the experimental CRDs, which has all of the new stuff, or you can install the standard CRDs, which are the more limited subset, which has graduated and is officially adopted.
Right.
So
It's
a
even though
little
like the
clunky.
CRD might say like an experimental HTTP CRD that has the new feature that was just introduced in the last release, it'll say like API version V1. It's installed from a different like set of CRDs. It's complex, but it's the solution that we arrived at as like
if it wasn't for the TCP and UDP route outliers, which at this point are kind of just in a holding pattern, you wouldn't even see it this way. You'd just be like, oh, it's all V1 now. But yeah, it's if you have ways that you think it can be made better and that we can cooperate between the different groups that are trying to follow this rough model, so that we at the very least can be consistent for users, let us know. It works, and it works to give us a pipeline to ship experimental features. It certainly isn't perfect. Let us know if you have thoughts.
The reason why we're asking is also to try to maintain that consistency and maybe just follow what Gateway API did for easiness. But one problem that I see with this inconsistency where some things can go into alpha with V1 alpha 1 tag, and then they have to graduate using conformance to beta and then to core V1, versus some of the new features having that capability to just go straight into V1 in 6 months. Like, you see my point? Like, now that FQDN is a new feature, it's going to go through this painful process of alpha, beta, sit for 2 years maybe to get to V1, even the core bits of egress. But now, once we get our CRDs to V1, it's just 6 months for new features. Why is that? That's the part that is.
I hear you. I hear you.
I think
how would you prefer things go?
I think we have to draw a line. I think we have to say when you're adding a feature to an existing API object, right? Like in this case, FQDN is a feature added to admin network policy. Admin network policy has existed for a long time. We are literally adding a field or two. Like in that case, it seems really reasonable to follow the experimental flowing into standard timeline. Now, if we wanted to implement tenancy and we decided that tenancy involved a brand new object, brand spanking new, called admin network policy tenancy, in that scenario, it makes a lot of sense maybe to rewind that specific object back to alpha, right? Does that make sense, Surya? I think maybe that's where we could like draw the line. Because obviously you can't be adding objects to the API and just punting them straight to V1.
Yeah, Mike said in chat what I was going to say out loud, just so it's perfectly clear. We're kind of aware of this problem and we dropped beta entirely. There is no beta. We go straight from alpha to V1, and you hit V1 experimental basically when you have conformance tests, and then you hit standard when you have at least 3 implementations. At this time, now we're getting into the realm of reporting success with those conformance tests. So there's good parts of the system and some parts that are confusing. But we dropped beta altogether.
But what is your V1 type? What do your V1 types look like?
They're just TCP route and UDP route right now because nobody's supporting them. So we're not deleting them because we know people are trying to use them. There are implementations using them, but nobody's coming up to upstream and being like, I will get the conformance test done and then get the people together that need to run these conformance. Like nobody's focused on it. So it's really just those two. TLS route technically, which is, it's a weird one. We're committed to it now, but I think it's a weird one. So hopefully that answers your question.
I guess to also echo Surya's question in chat about like adding things to alpha, that I feel like that's a situation that we like haven't really had because we like did most of the work of like creating new objects. And then we have the stragglers. I think it's still a bit of an open question of like if Gateway API were to introduce a new resource, come up with some new protocol, like whatever route,
Stun
MySQL
route.
route, yeah, stun route, something like that. If that would be introduced in experimental as a V1 Alpha 1 or V1 Alpha 4 or whatever we're at now resource, or if that starts at V1, like it would be an experimental channel regardless, but like what API version would it have? I don't know the answer to that.
I think that
Yeah,
would be a
that's-
question we would have to ask ourselves because we haven't had that happen in a long time. So,
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, at least we know that we don't have a single process in place and it's a bunch of things, right? So that's something we can agree on.
There was no
Well,
established
yeah, but-
great way to do this.
yeah, we were definitely making the path that wasn't there. So, but I think the most important thing
So-
we can do right now between different sub projects is if we're all kind of doing roughly the same thing, we just be as consistent as we can be, so that users are like not looking at 5 different ways that things are done.
So you said TCP route was still alpha, right? Is that
Yeah.
or okay? So then
And
then
UDP route.
something's horribly messed up then, because so check out this link right here's your experimental TCP route CRD from your repo, right? It is
V1 Alpha 2?
saying it's API version at the I was like, sorry,
That's
yeah,
the CRD version. Yeah, we
Yeah,
use
yeah,
we don't
you're right.
use the
I was
older
reading it
CRD
wrong.
versions.
Okay, cool.
But you'll
cool.
see the top
I
version
see.
is V1 Alpha 2, yeah.
Yeah, you're right. Okay,
Okay,
so
yeah, we've been
then
on the-
nothing's horribly broken.
Yeah,
Sorry
no
about
worries.
that.
No, I understand. I understand. That's
I was
that's
just getting
easy to mistake.
confused.
Mhm.
Okay, that makes a lot more sense. So, Surya, I think for us, and thing we can document, like if we're adding, fields and small features to existing API, flow through experimental. If we're adding brand new API objects, flow through alpha. So is that fair enough for now?
Maybe. I'm not convinced, but yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, the reasons because we as a sub project don't have many new objects or new custom
Right.
resource definitions. We add features to our ANP or BANP, and the only thing I can think of is DNP. When developer network policies come, then it makes sense to start from alpha. If it's a new object, then we do the proper alpha, beta, V1. But once ANP and BANP does become V1, and let's say we want to add ingress support to ANP, I would make it experimental on V1, right? Like I don't see I think it'll make it very confusing if ingress on ANP is now alpha all of a sudden. So
Right, I
the
agree.
reason is because alpha would have already diverged a lot based on V1 where ANP is. So any new features should be done on V1 branch version, right? Even the client breaking change that we did recently is in alpha. So if you develop ingress on this, it doesn't make much sense to me. Like, yeah.
Roger that. Does everybody agree with the sentiment that we just at least need to be consistent?
Yes.
Yeah.
100%.
So I think now might be as good a time as any for us to, I know it's a lot, I know it's extra work, but I'm willing to put forward some work to try to maybe come up with a sub-project standard. And the reason why now might be as good a time as any is multi-network is starting to move into CRDs. They're starting to move out of entry and into CRDs soon. So we'll have 3 different groups kind of doing we can't get KEPs to happen, so we're going outside of KEPs kind of process that we've started to define in GEP, rather in Gateway API. 3 different groups doing it. Now might be a good a time as any to start kind of like having a common org for process and stuff. I know it sounds like a lot of like extra work that's not really like fun work, but I'll put my money where my mouth is and say I'm willing to start working on that, at least get some basics covered.
Yeah, we need to all be
Anybody
shipping
else?
CRDs the same. Yeah, we need to, because like we're duplicating a lot of Gateway APIs documentation. Like we need to be shipping CRDs in a uniform way across Kubernetes. Like as this becomes more of the norm.
Yeah. In 2025, 2026, as this becomes the thing that people just do to get, we'll call them extensions to core, we want it to be the same way. It'll be really
core's
bad
never
if
gonna
everybody's doing
change
everything.
anymore.
Yeah. Well, what I mean is
Unless
like we're
Tim
heading
is
into
like,
yeah.
unless Tim goes delete, redo. It's like,
Yeah, if nothing
core's
else,
not
this
changing.
pattern for like keeping core locked in, but then having these extensions through CRDs is emerging. Obviously, Gateway API has been at the front of that. So probably a good time as any for us to start thinking about how we make sure that's good for the users of Kubernetes so that they don't desperately want to fork Kubernetes.
Yeah,
So
yeah, true. Okay, where would we do that work? Like, I would assume we
follow up.
want it into.
I'll
Like, it'd
find.
be
I
sick
think
if
maybe
we
I'll
had
start
a
with
website.
Yeah, maybe light touch first. No, we don't need to do any big like boil the ocean kind of thing to get started, but maybe I'll put a little to do for myself to start a discussion somewhere and pull in Surya, everybody here, and then people from multi-network, since they're about to go on this journey as well. And just start a discussion. That it doesn't have to be any more complicated than that to get started. Just let
Sounds
everybody know
good.
that we're thinking about this.
It wouldn't
Yeah,
hurt
I
to
mean,
grab the multi-cluster too.
Yeah,
Did I? Yeah, you're right. Yep. Good point.
I
I'll add
think
that to my note.
a first action item in that note could literally just be like, action item, pull out duplicate documentation from Gateway API and Network Policy API and put it in one place around the release process, right? Like, if we could just have pointers on our website back to like the actual official SIGs CRD release documentation, that'd be great.
All right, I set
Okay.
myself a Slack reminder, and you will probably receive a GitHub ping from a discussion somewhere at some point here.
Cool. Thank you very much, Shane. Okay, that's all I have on the agenda. Shane, if you happen to talk to Tim Hotkin anytime in the next couple of days, just giving him a little poke to go check out that PR would be super helpful. The API review PR.
Yeah, I will do that.
He's already been CC'd on there, but if it comes up.
Okay. Yep. Will do.
Okay. Anything else for today, y'all? Going once, going twice. Sold. Thanks for coming. Thanks for having a quick meeting. It is the week of the 4th of July, so it looks like SIG Network might be canceled later this week for folks going to that. So if I don't
At least
see
Dan
you,
and I
have
were
a
in favor. Nobody else has responded yet, but that was the
well, all the Americans. So
yeah, the
if you're an
Americans are in
American,
favor.
yeah, have a happy holiday. If not, have a happy good rest of the week.
Yeah, thank you
Cheers.
all. Have a great long weekend.
Take care, y'all.
Thanks. Talk to you later.
We have
Bye.
a general election on the 4th.
There you go.
We're celebrating. Yep.
Awesome. Well, have a good time. Good luck with your flight planning. Let's talk to you later.
Yeah, cheers. Bye for now.